And one of the there we go. One of the organizers of tonight's session. Also here with me today is Nicole from the Disability Participation News Hub. She's been the lovely person sending you emails and reminders, and me too. And we also have Gillian Kearns, who is currently on a train, and waving. And who is one of my other co-directors in Disabled Women Ireland. And the other person who's part of this team is Nim Kearns, who may pop in at some point, but we'll see. And we basically have been the folks who have put together this session, which is part of a wider series that we're calling Access Media. So I'll explain what that is, but first I'll just start off with a couple of access things. So you may or may not have noticed that we have disabled the chat function for tonight's session. That's because the chat can sometimes interfere with people who use screen readers. So what you can do instead is you are able to message myself, the host, and any of the co-hosts. So you can still ask any questions that you have, or if you're having any, tech problems, that's absolutely fine. You can get in contact with us, but it just stops it from interfering with people who are using screen readers. Um, Tonight is a kind of a conversation, so it's a facilitated discussion, and we have a fantastic panelist of people who are going to be, I guess, answering some of my questions, and then answering some of yours. So as you have questions, as kind of things arise, please stick them into the chat, and at the end we'll have a Q&A session where Nicole is going to read out the questions and the panelists will answer. I guess the other thing to note, which you probably have all seen once you join the call, is that we're recording this. This is for people who couldn't make it tonight, but we're not going to share it super publicly. Or no, we are. I forget which one we're doing. But if anybody is uncomfortable with that, basically just turn off your cameras, please and thank you. And after this session, we are going to be sending on the materials that we discuss. So if where our panelists have kind of resources or things that they think are interesting for you to take a look at, we're going to be sending on the recording to the tonight's session, along with any resources after the fact. So, next things next. What is Access Media? So, Access Media is a project that has been created by Disabled Women Ireland and the Disability Participation News Hub. It is being funded by Commission Amman, and I guess it basically was a project that we decided that we wanted to put together because we felt that it was really important that we start having conversations about how disabled people are represented in the media, and how we support disabled people into getting positions and roles across media, because we think that the stories that get told on screen or in the news media is very much influenced by those who are making media. So we have created this series, which basically, and I guess the reason why we're doing it now is with, I guess, the big pushback against kind of EDI and this, what are they calling it, sunsetting of EDI across various different things. We think it's really important that we keep pushing, we keep talking about kind of the representation of disabled people and keep pushing towards a more, I guess, human rights based understanding and conversation around disability. We've put together this series, which is 5 sessions. So we had the first a month ago, where we talked about basically the language that we use to talk about disability and how we tell stories in ways that are about disabled people, that are empowering, I guess, and really reflect, I guess, who we are as people. We're now moving on to 3 panel discussion sessions, which I'm quite excited by. This one on accessing production spaces, so accessing roles behind a camera. We're then going to have a session on disabled people in journalism, and then a session on disabled people in the media. Or on screen. And we know that, people sometimes flip-flop between being on screen and behind the screen. We've done our best. A lot of people in this industry wear multiple hats, but we have a really fantastic, I guess, 3 panels of fantastic speakers, and we're really kind of quite excited to have put it together. I guess the one thing that I sort of do is, or I like to explain is, or I think it's useful to explain is, why am I facilitating this session? Is it just because I'm part of Disabled Women Ireland? Potentially, but no, in this case, or because I volunteered for the job. One of the things that I do for my actual day job is I do a little bit of broadcast media. So I do a little bit of science communication for very small humans on RT Junior, and then, normal sized humans I'm a very short person, so normal size humans actually sounds quite strange to say, but you know what I mean. For adults, too. Um, and I do kind of science communication TV series. And one of the things that I noticed, and one of the reasons why I really wanted to put this particular panel together is because I've had very positive kind of experiences when filming the various pieces of work that I've worked on. But very often it's because the access needs that I have, I'm a wheelchair user, fit very neatly in with what is easy to achieve in um within the constraints of, I guess, um producing media the way it's currently structured, right? So the way that I was describing this to our panelists is there's nothing about my disability that prevents me from being able to work a 12-hour shooting day. Um, there's, other challenges that I would have. We think a lot about, how do we get the wheelchair to this location? How do I not have to stand up for too long? There is ways in which we talk about my access needs, but for the most part, I guess for me, personally, I don't think necessarily the productions that I've been part of have had to change fundamentally how they do what they do to have me be part of it. Um, and I think that's a shame. And I think that's insufficient, right? And we need to start thinking about how do we change how we do what we do to make it accessible. We can't just have those of us who fit quote unquote neatly into existing systems, being the ones who are taking part. We need to fundamentally change those systems so that they work better for all bodies and all minds. Or at least that's my belief. And I think the panelists believe too. But I'm going to let them actually introduce themselves to you. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to start off and I'm going to ask each panelist in turn to introduce themselves because I think that's much nicer than listening to somebody talk about you, or at least I hate that. And then we'll get on to some questions. So, if that's all right, then I am going to ask Bell, Al Bellamy to introduce themselves, please.
Hello, everybody. I'm Al. I am a white person with kind of shoulder length auburn hair and big round metal framed glasses. And I have tonsillitis, so I sound interesting tonight, so apologies for that. I'm a director in theatre and film, and I work in disability led productions that work with creatively embedded access in the productions themselves, and also do some work as an access consultant and advocate.
Perfection. Lovely. Thank you. Thanks, Al. Okay, I'll move on to Anne Heffernan, please. Hi, Anne.
Hi there. My name is Anne Heffernan, and I'm a white woman with straight blonde hair. And I am a TV and feature documentary producer, and most recently co-produced a feature documentary called A Quiet Love, which was the first feature film produced in Irish Sign Language, which I co-produced with my colleague Sean Hurley, who's a deaf sign language user, who I wish could join us this evening, but he's traveling at the moment. And it was, as I said, kind of the first documentary produced by a mixed deaf and hearing team and employed 28 members of the deaf community across the production in various roles. So I suppose I'm here in that capacity.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anne. Naomi Kumar, do you mind introducing yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, I'm Naomi. I am mixed race, so I'm white and Indian. I have long brown hair and green eyes, and I'm wearing a blue shirt. Um, I am an access coordinator and consultant. I also work in training and in access guide creation and documentation creating. I work with event spaces. I work with um, different kinds of workplaces and teams and in the arts to improve access for both sides, from everybody working in it, for people coming in, for to produce events for the artists all the way through, and then also for attendees and the people who are going to be consuming whatever is created. So that's me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Naomi. Now we'll go to Dorothy Leahy.
Hi, I'm Dorothy. I am white, westernized woman. I have dark hair. I'm wearing a purple shirt and a kind of tones of brown scarf. I'm an actor and a crew hand. I'm also on the executive at Irish Equity, which is the union that represents all performers and stage managers, the arts workers and the artists. And I also have a little bit of crossover with our colleagues that work at SIPTU over disability issues.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And last but not least, Freddie McNesa.
Hi, I am Ferdia. I'm a white man with a beard, silver glasses, fairly long hair. Um, I am a writer mostly. Um, I have also acted. I've mostly write for TV, for Fair City and some other cool stuff that I'm legally not allowed to brag about, even though I do want to. Um, but and have started to dip my toes into academia as well. I'll be presenting at a conference in September. But yeah.
Fantastic. Perfect. So it's a fantastic panel of folks that we've have here tonight, and we're really grateful to have their time. So what I'm going to do is we're going to start off the conversation, I guess, by to give you a little bit of the behind the scenes magic of how this comes together. We had a chat about a week ago where we sort of talked about the themes and the things that we think are interesting. And so from that, we've kind of pulled some questions together. And so we're going to go through those to kind of pull out different themes that we think are interesting to talk about in the world of how we, I guess, support and support system change and support on an individual level disabled people's participation in media, but particularly behind the scenes. So, Al, when we were framing the session, we were thinking a lot about the challenges and the barriers for disabled people accessing production spaces. And we spent a lot of time, I guess, talking about what individuals can do themselves and about what organizations can do, and then also what needs to change at a really big level, right? But you are a disabled director, and you have worked with multiple, I guess, crews of disabled people. Um, and you've seen this from a couple of different angles. So I'll go for the big question here, which is what do you think are the major challenges, and what do you think are the things that actually make a difference?
Um, yeah, I actually have a list.
I love a list.
I come prepared with a list. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face is actually just the timelines. There's a very established kind of way of working that is, extremely tight on time and not accessible to most of my non-disabled colleagues as well. And that's the big challenge because when you're asking for extra time, you're really asking for extra money. And so I think I'll stick to my list. That's one of the big challenges. Beyond that, I think there's a kind of emerging one size fits all approach when it comes to making accessible work that really presumes a lot about the people you're going to be working with. Every project I take on is a completely fresh start. I might have brought some ideas over from a previous project, but if they're not in reaction or response to the people who are in front of me and their access needs, then they're not going to be much use to us, and they're probably going to be a huge drain on our resources. So, a one size fits all approach isn't really useful. It can be a real challenge when it's the classic. You've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. Like everybody is so different. I also think one thing that really prevents us from making spaces more accessible and a challenge I've come up against a lot is just, I guess, a kind of fear of getting it wrong and not having a creative mindset when it comes to access. Access has to do like many things. The first is actually work for the people who will use it. But beyond that, you can get creative with what that looks like. And then there's the other challenges, infrastructure being a massive one. Currently in the theatre industry, a rehearsal space that is warm or even the right size is hard to find, let alone one that is level access, let alone one that doesn't have fluorescent lighting tubes, which are an absolute nightmare. So there's a few challenges off the top, well, not off the top of my list, but things that I think make a really huge difference. There's something that I guess a shorthand I use, I call it the buy-in. And this was because I worked with a producer in 2024, and it was his first time working on an accessible production. And he was coming in, and I explained everything to him, and he was like, this is the first thing we need to say to every person we hire, is that accessibility is our number one priority. And once we did that, all of a sudden, decisions got a lot easier. Because you'd have a conversation with the lighting designer and you wouldn't have to worry about saying, hey, don't shine the light directly in people's eyes, because he'd already have considered that, because accessibility was the first priority. So I think it's useful for a kind of cultural shift at work to secure this buy-in of people knowing that that's your priority from day one. Other ways that I think can really, or other things that I think can really make a difference is using the access budget. If you're applying to the Arts Council or ADI, use that access budget for all it's worth, because it often won't only be for you as a disabled person, but you'll end up doubling up with some of your cast and crew, that like, I need certain things to access my workspace, but sometimes the people I work with also need those things. So it ends up being like really, really fruitful for all of us. Hiring an access officer or coordinator, if you can afford one, is like, makes a massive difference, because then people don't have to double job. I think I said this in our prep call, but I recently discussed with a disabled colleague of mine, like, what do our peers get to think about when they're not doing their job? Like, or when they are doing their job, what do they get to think about beyond the job they're doing, and is it accessible? Do they get to really just delve into being an actor, being a director, being a producer, being a set designer, and not worry about the rest of the stuff? And I think that's because so often we can't afford to access coordinators, and so someone ends up double jobbing on the production. And then other things that I think really help are like embedding professionalization or mentorship into a project is really, really useful. We discussed this briefly on the prep call, how access to formal education streams is quite ableist, and it's really, really hard for disabled people to get into formal education. So if you have a project that's going to be accessible, why not use that as an opportunity to mentor or professionalize? And also, just one I've been thinking about lately, be kind, be clear. I don't mind knowing a place, like, I don't mind, I do mind, but some things, because of the lack of infrastructure, some things are not accessible to me, and I'd rather be told clearly than kind of fussed over. And that goes kind of in general. I think a lot of, because of all the tight timelines, the lack of infrastructure, we are all like really, really heightened a lot of the time. And so clear communication is just like a really simple, free way to make a space way more accessible to everybody. You need to be back at this time. This space is going to have fluorescent lights. You won't be able to sit down for an hour. If you do need to, you need to tell me now. Things like that, that just like set the tone so much better, and it's free. Like, because I think people worry a bit that they're gonna break me, or like that I need to be wrapped in bubble wrap because I have access needs. But the reason I'm being clear about those access needs is because I need other people to be clear back, and I'm trying to set the tone for that conversation. So yes, that's probably way too many things.
No, it's loads,
And I
but they're
didn't
all
even
pretty
say all
fascinating.
of them that I'd written down, Amy.
We can add them to the resources that we send out afterwards. No, I think you've touched on some really interesting ideas here, Al. I guess one of the things that we're seeing, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is, this idea of, you were talking about like people being afraid of getting things wrong is a really interesting idea, because And that's stopping people from trying. And it's actually much better to try, but there's a fear of I don't know enough, or I'm not an expert, or who do I talk to? And it's also, and don't get me wrong, those experts are out there. We have Al, we will come to Naomi in a minute. But also some of this stuff we can derive from first principles, right? It's like, I use a wheelchair 99.9% of the day, right? It's not going to be super surprising that I'll probably need a chair readily available if I'm going to be standing. You know, if somebody is, wears sunglasses, or if somebody says that they're sensitive to light, don't shine a stage light in their eyes is probably, you don't necessarily need a super, there's a benefit to having kind of conversations about accessibility and some of this, but some of it is stuff we can just if we think about other people, we can kind of get. And I think that's the cultural shift that we need to really start moving towards. I absolutely agree with your point that asking for longer timelines is also asking for more money. And I don't think we have a solution to that yet. I don't think we've really fundamentally started challenging that. And I guess that was what I was trying to kind of pinpoint when I was giving my introduction. Um, that I haven't necessarily, costed more money, because I've been able to work within how things work. And I think about that as a massive problem all the time. Um, and yeah, I guess one of the things I just wanted to point out before we move on to Anne, one of the things that we're coming up against quite frequently in Disabled Women in Ireland, and because you brought it up, I'm using it as a chance, is talking about reasonable accommodations. So reasonable accommodations are changes that are made to an environment or a workplace, in order to make it accessible for you. And one of the things that we're finding at the moment, or we're having conversations about, is where reasonable accommodations are being enforced on somebody. Somebody's going in and going, oh, I don't know, you're in a wheelchair, therefore you must sit down. And we were asking, we went to a lawyer about this to try and get a better sense of what's the answer for this. And the answer is, if you don't want it, if it's not what you choose, then it's not reasonable and it's not an accommodation. Um, and I think, as we become a little bit more aware of access needs, and maybe, I guess, some of the standard access needs, or typical access needs of people with different disability types, we tend to take a one-size-fits-all approach. And that can actually not be reasonable, and we can push back against that. But also, I think, highlights maybe the importance of asking. Okay, we're going to move on to Anne, because Anne is one of the co-producers of a really fantastic documentary, which I would absolutely recommend finding someplace to see, called A Quiet Love. And it's a really beautiful, I guess, three beautiful stories told together. But the thing that, for me, I find most exciting about it, I mean, I'm always excited when I see the stories of disabled people represented on screen. And particularly when they're told in a very beautiful and a very nuanced way. But one of the things you told me, when we were preparing, is that there was an awful lot of deaf people involved in the production, which absolutely makes sense. It feels very intuitive. I feel like I can feel that from watching it. It felt like it was very reflective of kind of the community, and of conversations I have had with deaf people. But can you tell us a little bit more about that experience, and what kind of things you had to put in place? And from your perspective, I mean, as I say, I felt like I could feel the difference when I was watching it, but what felt different, or how was the experience different for having the involvement of the community itself?
Yeah, thank you firstly for your kind words about the film. We're very proud of the film itself and everything that went on screen and behind the scenes as well. And I suppose it's worth noting that of those 28 members of the deaf community who were involved, that was at people who were at all different stages of their career. So from the very top level, my co-producer Sean, who's a deaf sign language user, and from to our development producers, archive producers, and then we had lots of kind of people who were their first time ever on a set, and actors, extras, and then we had kind of an experienced hair and makeup team as well who were involved, and then we had two trainees who were kind of working across the project as well, across pre and production and post production as well. So, it was kind of across all levels, and I think one of the things that was most important about this, because this was a deaf-led documentary from the development stage, and because Sean was such an integral part of the development of the production from the outset, is that and the other thing is we spent a long time trying to get this film funded, like 5 years, long time. And that gave us a lot of time to sit and talk about what we wanted this film to be and what we imagined it would be. And in that process, we came up with the idea that we wanted to have this impact campaign that kind of ran in parallel with the production, and that campaign was about creating more opportunities for members of the deaf community in our industry, which has always been a very kind of closed industry, I think, in that way. And one of the things we discovered, and it's something that you hear a lot, is that it's really expensive to make productions accessible and it costs a lot of money. And I just wanted to kind of offer an alternative on that, because actually what we found is, one, that we built into our budgets from the outset costs for sign language interpreting, and all of those kind of access costs were there in the budget from day one. So I think when it starts to get expensive is when people are about to go into production on the day of their first shoot and they go, oh, we have to make this accessible now, and suddenly there's no money for that. So that has to happen from the outset, from day one, from the day you're making your first pitch and saying this is how much this project is going to cost. But what we found is that actually having an accessible production opened up doors for us in terms of funding, and there was specific funds for feature documentaries, and also the international market that suddenly opened for us because we had an accessible production. And actually, the film wouldn't have got made if we didn't have access to those funds. So that actually kind of, we found, worked in our favor in many ways. And so on a practical level, then it meant that we had ISL interpreters, we had deaf interpreters for sort of for members of the community who found it more comfortable to communicate in that way. We had ISL classes for our hearing crew as well. So there was a number of kind of practical things that we were able to put in place as a result of that. But I suppose, like, when we talk about having the lived experience of the deaf community across the project from the outset, I mean, that was essential. Like, that was absolutely vital for the realization of this project, really, for the authenticity of storytelling, for the casting of contributors, just for every aspect of it. And as you said yourself, you can see it on screen now, and that just wouldn't have happened without that. And I think that one of the things that we found, certainly when you're looking at the international funding landscape as well, there has finally been a shift, and rightly so, that level of authenticity and involvement is necessary to get your project off the ground. If an entirely hearing crew had been pitching this project and saying, we want to make this project about the deaf community rather than with it, it would never and should never have got off the ground. And so we found that level of involvement was absolutely crucial for the film. And like, it wasn't without its challenges either. I don't want to say it was all smooth sailing. There were times that, for example, we would have got selected to take part in a really important pitch for the project, where it was like incredible, the first ever sign language pitch to come to this particular documentary festival or this event, and we would get selected for it, and you would turn up, and people, or not turn up, but we would say, we need sign language interpreters for this pitch. And it would be shock horror, like why would we be expected to provide such a thing? And so what Al was saying about, this idea of having to think about things while everybody else who was pitching was thinking about their pitch and what they were going to say and how they were going to plan. We were thinking about, is there going to be an interpreter there when we show up? And so there were, moments like that made things tricky. And I don't want to take up loads of time. I will say one thing, just again to touch on what Al spoke about this fear of getting things wrong. We got things wrong a lot. We made lots of mistakes on this production. And what we did do is that Sean and I sat down at the end of every shoot day and we said, what did we do right today and what did we do wrong? And we talked to each other, and we kind of said, I remember Sean on one particular day, he came up to me and he said, it didn't feel very deaf today. And we kind of said, okay, right, what do we do? What did we do wrong? Because yesterday felt really deaf. And we talked about it and we kind of worked through it and sort of said, where did it go wrong? And we didn't beat ourselves up for the days that we got it wrong. We kind of said, look, we can't change what went before, but let's work on it for the next time. So there was definitely, every day was a school day. We learned as we went along.
Well, this is it. It's all part of the learning. And I really love you being open about things that don't go well, or about it constantly being a process. Because also sometimes I think when you have disabled people in the room, or a mix of disabled or non-disabled people, or a mix of people with different disabilities, we're all still trying to work around different access needs. We're all still trying to figure out what our access needs are. As much as we talk about kind of, and it's true that we are experts by lived experience, we're still not perfect experts, right? I guess, yeah, there's no perfect experts. Um, and I've definitely had days when I've been filming where I have been, and realized that there was an access need that I didn't realize I had. Um, and Yeah, so I think also kind of maybe not having people separated out, even in our own minds, into kind of these are the people who definitely know, and these are the people who must learn, that it's all a process and that we work together, is a really important bit. Um, I guess one of the things that we've been talking about quite a lot, and that really struck me on, is this idea of like accessibility is not expensive if you build it in from day one. And I guess if there's a thing that Disabled Women Ireland, we're a disabled persons organisation. We do a lot of advocacy in different spaces. One of the things that we are trying to get the conversation pushed towards is we're not talking about disabled people being a cost. We're talking about us as investments, and that we want to see disabled people being invested in and supported. And we want to, we believe that there is a benefit and a societal benefit to investing in disabled people. Um, and I think that maybe in the media, we have a really kind of clear example where, authenticity is really important, and it's an important part of storytelling. It makes for better stories, in my opinion. Um, but it's something that people also want to see. And therefore, having disabled people invested in projects in an authentic way is actually a strength for a project. And I think that's a really interesting framing around it. We tend to think about it in terms of maybe not even a negative, at best a neutral, and kind of go, look, it's what we have to do. But thinking about it as actually being a really positive thing and something that makes a better piece of media or a better project is something that I think is really lovely, and something that maybe those of us who have worked in these spaces have experienced ourselves or feel. Um, but maybe we are always trying to convince other people of. Um, Naomi, I'm going to move to you next. And we've sort of talked a little bit here about kind of accessibility, and both actually Anne and Al talked about like having to do two jobs of kind of being your own access coordinator, or the access coordinator of people you're working with, and also doing the role that you have on set. But you are an access coordinator day to day. And I guess I'm going to ask you first to explain what that is, um, and to ask what's different when we have an access coordinator in a production. What changes in the room?
Sure. Well, day to day, really, what I am looking at is identifying, and it's not just on sets. I work across a wide range of workplaces in different areas, but identifying in like workplaces, events, buildings, even just teams, um, all of the different access needs that people would have. Like you said yourself, like we become an expert on ourselves, but there's so many different types of need out there. And so my job is to wear all of the hats and go, if I had this need, what would this look like? If I had this need, what would this look like? And communicate with everyone about that. So I think about the physical needs that people have, the communication styles, the emotional needs, different neurotypes, people with injuries. You have a job and then you come in and you've broken your leg or you've torn a calf or something like that, and suddenly you have access needs. Um, and managing anxiety for a lot of people as well is a huge access need that people have. Um, and so my job is to identify all of those needs and then find workable solutions for as many of them as possible, particularly when you're talking about conflicts of access. And the one I tend to use as an example all the time is most buildings require a certain amount of luminescence, a certain amount of lighting. If it's a public building, it needs to be this bright. However, that is really difficult for some neurotypes. But if you're partially sighted, you need even brighter lighting than that. And if I'm working with both of these things, you're negotiating with people on that. And so then what comes out of that really is touching on something Al said earlier, is just clear, kind communication both ways. It's then my job to communicate both ways between the people who have needs and the rest of the setting as to what's going on with who. And how this is really important to address, because I do the advocating for the people so that they can do the work, right? So my job is to release people. If I advocate well for people, then it releases them to be able to not think about their access needs and do their job. They're not managing their needs then, they're not managing their relationships to the rest of the team or to their workplace or to their contract. Because their needs are taken care of by me. Um, and then after that kind of element of it, you kind of come into crafting documentation and guides and expectations that communicate real clear expectations that are comprehensive and collated, that everyone can go, this is what's going to happen here. And I can just refer to this documentation, and like people would be aware of kind of call times of set lists and stuff like that. Think of that, but for every kind of need that could be going on as well. So what do I do in this situation? And then you make guides for those kinds of things. And then the next part of it is really checking in and maintaining relationships both ways round. You're maintaining relationships with the buildings and the spaces, and you're also maintaining relationships with the teams, and you're maintaining relationships with the individuals as well, to make sure that as needs change and different things come up, you even said yourself, you bump into things and you go, oh, that's an access need I actually didn't know that I had. And you go, okay, that's great. I'll add that to my list and we'll get that sorted. And access needs look very, very wide and very broad. Everyone thinks, can a wheelchair get here? But sometimes my job as an access coordinator is reminding someone that they need to go to the toilet or that they need to eat. And so, it's a very wide-ranging job as well. And then to answer the second part of your question, what happens when we do this? I mean, I think we've all kind of at this point heard of intimacy coordinators when it comes, you've heard of them online, or when it comes to sets, or people interview them for various different things, um, for, working in the arts and on screen. And that job is for the comfort and the safety and the communication of somewhere between about 3 to 10 people on a set. And everyone thinks that's great. But think about how many different people have different access needs or disabilities, who have injuries and different neurotypes and communication styles in just a regular workplace, or even on a set, As soon as you have someone whose job it is to do all of that, the safety of everyone goes up, the comfort of everyone goes up. People, like I said, they're just released to be able to do their job. And the people with needs are released and relieved, and they're able to work freely. And the workplace or the managers or the people who have hired me generally feel much more comfortable and confident knowing that, there is, if something does go wrong or there are issues, there's someone to talk to about it. There's someone to point things out kindly and to adjust. And so then they're not working poorly with people who have access needs, which is clearly, if someone's hired me, they want that to be a better space for people who do have access needs. So as soon as we start thinking about all of these things, it changes the security and the safety, and means that everyone can engage really, really well and do their job really, really well. I hope if I've done my job well, everyone else can do their job well. Yeah, so that's the answer to your question.
That's brilliant. That's fantastic. Thank you. And I guess, yeah, there's a really interesting idea here, which is around kind of a friend and a friend of mine who's not disabled, and I, we often have this conversation that, like, if we can walk into a room, or in my case, wheel into a room, and just kind of assume that everybody's access needs, what looks different, what feels different. And that's not, I guess, to say that, we shouldn't help disabled people, or we shouldn't kind of focus on people who, have substantial kind of access needs. But it's like, what is different? Because, as you say, there are people who are temporarily disabled, people who are having, anxious moments or stressful, people who are going through bad times, or hard times. And if we sort of just take that concept of having empathy and compassion and going, okay, let me assume underneath the surface here that there may be access needs. And how do we as a set kind of make it a little bit more of an accessible environment? There's something really interesting in that, and something really interesting about I don't know, building the utopia that we want to live in, right? Where we just always have compassion and empathy. And that doesn't necessarily need to come at the expense of anybody else. And I think that, having people who can have those conversations is a really fantastic and helpful and useful thing. So we've talked a little bit now about kind of the, individual things that need to change, right? And the individual sort of, or the things that individuals can do and individual experiences. And we're going to take a slight step outwards. And we're going to turn to Dorothy. So, Dorothy, you've been working in the media for quite a long time. So you're thinking a lot and working with sort of the unions and things like this. You're thinking a lot about the big picture ideas. So I guess, can you give us a lay of the land in terms of what are kind of the policies and situation, the supports available for disabled people, and how is that being translated into practice, or is it, and where is it not?
Yeah, okay, and just to flag it so that it can be understood where I come from, I've worked approximately half of my career as a conventionally non-disabled person, and I acquired my disability. So I have more or less 50-50 of my professional time in either state, which is a point of privilege, and I acknowledge it. The other point of privilege I have is that I am long enough in an industry that has blacklisted me repeatedly, and I've survived, which is a point of privilege that far too few of our colleagues in this particular area of the industry do not have. That's whether they're non-disabled or they're disabled. And obviously we know we have mountains of data that says that anywhere that there is a vulnerability in an industry that's working on fear, as the arts and film industries are in Ireland, that is only magnified for people who have any sort of additional point of identity. So any kind of I prefer strategically marginalizing factor, typically known as a minoritizing factor. Word choice being really, really important. I like that one because it shifts off of with a problem into this space that's so many of the colleagues have already mentioned. So for us, if we look at, say, even just the last 30 years in the Irish context, so that has largely been characterized by, in the first half, a run to the bottom. And in the second half, we are beginning to see an emergence of a real desire for better practice. We are starting to see some champions emerge. We have some fantastic initiatives, largely going off in secret and quiet in little pockets. If you know people, wonderful. We're at that kind of junction where people are just beginning to get their courage together and come to the point where they can say, do you know what we're doing? To shout some people out, Al is doing some fantastic work there in the directing space. I've had the privilege of working with them. I know firsthand how fantastic they are as a boss, as an access provider. Karen Scully over at Louise Kiley Casting runs a program all around incidental casting. If you're not affected by disability, you wouldn't necessarily know she's doing it. And that is deliberate and by design. Essentially, her principle is, okay, government tells me 1 in 5 people are disabled. Therefore, I'm going to make sure that every casting, the stack of CVs I send to the clients, at least 20% of those will be disabled performers. And in the meantime, she runs a little list that you can opt on to, and a lot of us have, that says, so for instance, I've said to her, what I need sides a little bit bigger so I can see them, and I need flat level access to get into an audition. She provides those access points ahead of time so that when you walk into the audition room, you can do that at as close to a level playing field as you can. You walk in there, you do, as Naomi was saying, you walk in there, you do the job. You don't have to be worrying about everything else. And then when the producer goes, oh, that actor's blown me away, she will turn and she'll go, that's a great choice. Just so you know, he will be wanting to have a conversation with you about access needs. We've managed some of them today. If he's okay with it and you would like, we'll tell you how we did that. So the support is there already. And then as we roll into production spaces, we've got the likes of Dave Thomas leading out. We've got Kira. all of these people. We have the work that Naomi's doing, Kaylin's doing, we have 3 or 4 now really top class access coordinators. And then on the far end, we have the likes of the work that Gráinne is doing with Dublin International Film Festival to make the festival fully accessible as close as possible over a lot of years. And that can be anywhere from approaching films and saying, well, actually, we love your work, but we would like some subtitles. Can you arrange that? Can we help you? Can we do? There is a chill out space at every festival for neurodivergent folks who may feel that the environment is just a bit much. And it's never done with any fuss. Everything is, I see you, you're a person, I'm a person, how do we make this better? That's the theme that runs through all those people. So, and then for us, when we're looking from the union side of things, there are 3 key laws that have been really, really important over that time period. So in 2003, there was the big EU law that came in. This was the one for anybody who wasn't born yet, and I keep being reminded, I have lots of colleagues who weren't. In 1998, there was an EU decision that, you know what, all of public life has to be accessible.
Mm.
And there was some pushback from some of the nation states saying, oh, we can't, no. We can't do that from a standing start. Why on earth, what are you thinking? How do we be accessible tomorrow? Can we have more time? And the decision was made, yes, you can have 5 years. In 5 years' time, 2003, April the 1st, you must have all of public life accessible. And there were certain documents, there were certain standards given out. One, for example, was that every document produced by any organisation must be in every available local language, must also be in large print, must also be in Braille. And that doesn't happen. And then, so fast forward to 2013, and there were changes specifically to European law on for work. And the great idea there was that how do we combat disabled folks aren't getting enough jobs? What do we do? Okay, we're going to make it so that nobody can ask you anything about your disability status from the moment you show interest in a job until you're hired. Well, great and wonderful and ideal, fantastic, heart's in the right place. That works if you're maybe in an office tower somewhere in Dublin, in London, wherever you are. But when you're working in our industry, which is by its nature so very different on every project, it completely disempowers any kind of questions and conversations. And to offset that, they made this piece within the law that said, well, what we're going to have is every time anybody advertises a job ever, they have to have an access officer. So that when you apply, you go to the access office, who is not one of the interviewing panel, you tell them what they need, they will handle your access, everything will be great. That has happened for me maybe 4 times in my life, and 2 of those I had to ask for. These things don't happen routinely. We have people even today who go, oh, I didn't know. Oh, we don't have one. There is my county currently has an arts officer vacancy that they are advertising. You may not ring the office and ask any questions. If you do that, you will be taken out of the pool. You will apply only on one form. You may arrange privately for someone to do it for you, which is not the same as an access officer. And you may only submit it by email. But at the very bottom, there is that amazing little phrase that magics everything away. We strongly encourage diverse candidates to apply. Mm-hmm. And then the other piece of law that has been huge for us in the industry is the European Copyright Directive, which is in the case of Ireland back to 2016. So what that does is it's a rebalancing act, and that is for everyone, but particularly for economically disadvantaged performers and crew. It takes away the routine use of a buyout contract. Those are not supposed to be being used. It gives back the right to ongoing participation in a fair and proportionate way. Brilliant, all wonderful steps. None of these happen. So that's the big obstacle we have to cross, particularly over at the union. A lot of the work we do is on this. I'm referencing my notes because I want to quote her correctly. We had a fabulous sector organizer for a long while called Michelle Quinn, who, as it happened, was a disabled lady herself, which is not to disparage her able-bodied successor, he's brilliant too, is she was the first one who said, look, this is what we have is a lack of consequence. We have routine bad behavior and we have a lot of tick boxing. So we have a government that really doesn't care beyond the swanky photo opportunities. There's not a lot of desire in this government or its predecessor for actual meaningful change, but they will fund wonderful, it has to be said, wonderful video resources through the likes of Screen Island, through Safe to Create, through Man Creative Minds. You can take some really high quality training. You can do bystander training, access training, all of the things. You can learn and get confident on anything you like. And if you do that, your production will get money. But there are very limited checks. In some programs, none at all. And then what happens is that the whole enforcement side of that becomes reliant on people who are brave enough to whistleblow, who are feeling safe enough to come to us as members or anonymously and say, this thing has happened, and who know what their rights are in a workspace. We still have a lot of workforce, and particularly the people, again, with any strategically marginalizing factor, and the people who are disabled, who already are aware there are 200 people for my job. That is the realistic statistics since the start of COVID. We currently have 200 performers and over 80 crew for every job that's going. So it's very, very difficult when you are in a vulnerable place to believe that there is anybody there to back you up. And we come, we'll be there. We spend an awful lot of time one-on-one with people who have had some horrible, horrible experiences. And we are constantly in rooms with government, with our colleagues at Screen Island or at Spy or with the guilds or with the Arts Council. We're trying constantly to get the message across. Where we need to do a better job of work, I feel, is on communication. Not enough people understand they have a right to earn money. Is a huge one. Not enough people understand that when you are in work, it's not acceptable for your producer to be hammering on your door at 10 o'clock at night. It is not acceptable. And this is where Naomi's work and Karen's, where all of that comes in, and there is a line of defense now. But if you are going onto a job and you've just got this contract, you've just signed it, and you walk into your production office and go, hi, I'm your new hire. I would really love my first 7 days accessibility meeting. In this country, currently, 9 times out of 10, you will encounter a production office who go, what? And we need to change that. We also need some practical changes. Like, for instance, Neve Moriarty, lovely little Neve, who is not little anymore. She's a full-grown woman now. She did that wonderful piece with RTE 3 years ago, 2023, and pointing out that when she was working on her project in 2022, she was booked into the only accessible trailer in the UK and Ireland. So this at the time, and I went, do you know what? I'm not genned up on this as much as I should be, even working EDI for the union. And I went to look, and I have checked this again recently, and there are now, depending on your definition of disabled or accessible, there are either 2 or 6 trailers. That's in 3 years. And in that's because there's the one that Neve was using. There is one other which you can get into and has a hoist if you so need. So you can actually get around it and use the bathroom. There are 4 others that have a lift to get in the door. But for instance, one does not have a makeup station. One does not have a cooker that can be reached by a person independently. You must have a PA with you. So there is desire, there is examples of excellence, but there's also issues with entrenched bad behavior that isn't being caught. And in the midst of that, we have to talk in the form of avatars. So like, for instance, Sian Phillips, week before last, coming out saying that she's feeling that she has to retire because she's experiencing memory issues with her scripts. Now, it's not clear, and it's absolutely her right to keep private on that, whether that's because she feels squeezed out or whether that's because she's tried it with the various options that are available and doesn't like them. If she's saying, I've got to the point this isn't fun anymore, I'm retiring, awesome, fantastic, everybody should have the right to retire. But far too often, what we see, particularly in our avatar people, our standout stars, is we see people who are forced, even now, out of the industry. And yet we're just getting started on this. It's only
Mm.
last year we brought in widget timesheets and call sheets for the film industry. You can set your entire project up on widget timesheets, which is a pictorial language used by adults with learning difficulties a lot. That's only been there for a year. You can do that for €3. You can buy a template, you can put your whole, and so again, it speaks to what Anne is saying about budgeting from the jump. It's the case, it's that beautiful fall. We don't know what we're gonna do, but we have to jump out this plane. If we're more aware that legally we have to do this, and in from the start, what's going to happen is you come prepared for a swim. So when you're flung in, it's not so much of a problem.
And I suppose, Dorothy, I'm going to move on to Freddie now because actually the funding piece is one that he's been quite interested in recently and possibly has some thoughts on. Um, and I guess one of the things we've talked about kind of over the course of the last hour is how funding can be both an enabler and a barrier. And I was wondering, Freddie, if you wouldn't mind sharing your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Amy. Firstly, to say that I was on a project recently, and it was the first time I had an access coordinator for my needs at all on a TV project, which is kind of weird because I've been in a wheelchair my entire professional life, and yeah, that's not ideal. However, yeah, it was great. I felt actually, interestingly enough, I felt kind of unprepared for it in the sense of um, kind of engaging with the process and getting the best out of it. Hopefully, I will have many more such opportunities to kind of figure out how to work with an access coordinator in the best way. But that's great that that's becoming more and more the standard. Um, yeah, I was wondering, Amy, you kind of historicized interest me at the top of the call about this kind of rollback of some of the
Mm.
DEI initiatives. I do think that that's a really interesting because we're in a really interesting point here. I remember it kind of hit me like a train once when myself and my creative partner we went to a talk. Hmm. Can I say who it was? Yeah, it was an RTE presentation on new work. And yeah, it was just after Trump 2 was elected, and there was a lot of talk about woke being over, quote unquote. Um, and there was absolutely no talk about diversity and inclusion in the entire pitch for new work, despite the fact that kind of from let's say 2018 on, that had been in every talk that we've been to. Good, good. We wanted that to be very clear, and it was quite shocking how quickly it moved. I guess that's very negative. The positive is I think that the people who are still talking about it, I think there were some opportunists there who were looking at projects and saying, well, the only things that are getting approved at the moment and getting funding at the moment are projects that are quote unquote diverse, and can put something um, up front that quote unquote ticks some of those boxes. Um, that's not the case anymore, it seems broadly. There seems to be an awful lot less of that, which means that if you talk to people about diversity and inclusion now, they're kind of really about that life, which is good, which means that you can kind of rely on them to be real allies in that sense. So yeah, that was one of the things I was thinking about with the money, that there isn't a sense anymore. And I don't know how true this is in terms of the data of what's getting funded, but there was a sense of kind of soft money available for some opportunists. I took some meetings that I was quite shocked at the cynicism of that. Whereas now projects that appear and come up are from a very real point, looking to yeah, do something real with diversity, do something kind of utopian with how our media should look. Are and I guess aren't afraid of the fight in that way. Are understanding that that's um a position that not everyone that you will encounter will fully agree with. They may say that they agree with, but perhaps privately will not. So yeah, I think that um, the landscape has changed for both
Mm.
better and worse in that sense. I would say to change anything, obviously, as everyone's been saying, access coordination should be a top line priority going forward. There should be, and not just projects that are kind of quote unquote disability projects. As I said at the start, I've probably my working life has been like 50-50 stuff where I'm brought in as a writer who has a disability, and 50% I'm just a guy. So the times where I'm hired because this project was quote unquote looking for a disabled screenwriter or an actor, there's been some access coordination in the times that I've just been there as some guy. There's been absolutely nothing,
Mm.
and I think that that's clearly not good enough. So yeah, a kind of a routine amount of work, of funding to go in there, I think is important.
Mm. And actually, Freddie, you've lined us up very lovely, in a very lovely way for actually our first Q&A question, um, which is actually one that we were sent ahead of time. And so we're running a little bit over time. But what I'm going to do is we only have a couple of Q&A questions. If anybody has a Q&A a question that they want answered. What we did for our last session when we went over time, because again we were enjoying the chats that we were having so much, is we asked folks to basically put in their questions now or send them to us via email, and we will answer them over email back again. So if anybody needs to leave now that we've gone past the hour, that's absolutely fine. But we're gonna hang on and answer. I think we have one question and one comment. And yes, and we're going to turn off the recording because we've come to the end of the discussion piece.